The clinking of silver against porcelain was the restaurant's heartbeat. At Aurelia, where a single tasting menu cost more than a month's rent for most of the city, every sound was curated, every scent a deliberate note in a symphony of opulence. Lena moved through it all like a ghost, a silent, efficient presence in a simple black uniform. Her thick, square-rimmed glasses were a shield sliding down her nose as she leaned over to refill a water glass, an affectation she pushed back into place with a practiced, unobtrusive finger. She was forgettable by design, plain. That was the point. Tonight, the centerpiece of the main dining room was the table occupied by Julian Croft and his entourage. Julian, heir to the Croft Enterprises' fortune, was a man sculpted from privilege and arrogance. He laughed too loudly, gestured too broadly, his voice a percussive instrument of entitlement that cut through the hushed reverence of the other diners. He was trying to impress the older, quieter man at his table, a titan of industry named Arthur Sterling, whose potential partnership could elevate the Croft empire to a new stratosphere. Lena had been watching them all night, not just as a waitress, but with an analytical stillness that went unnoticed behind her meek facade. She had noted the way Julian dismissed the sommelier's recommendation with a wave of his hand, ordering the most expensive vintage not because he appreciated its notes of blackcurrant and cedar, but because the price was a declaration of his own importance. She had seen the subtle tightening around Mr. Sterling's eyes, a flicker of distaste that Julian, in his boorish performance, had completely missed. "Another bottle of the Petrus," Julian boomed, snapping his fingers in Lena's direction as she passed. He didn't look at her, his command thrown into the air like a dart aimed at a nameless servant. "Of course, sir," Lena murmured, her voice soft and even. She retrieved the bottle from the cellar, her movements fluid and economical. She presented it to Julian, her hands steady as she held the deep-punted bottle for his inspection. He glanced at the label, gave a dismissive nod, and went back to his story, a tedious anecdote about a yacht race in Monaco. Lena began the delicate process of uncorking the wine. The cork eased out with a sigh, not a pop, a small mark of professionalism that was lost on the man it was for. As she leaned forward to pour a taste for Julian to approve, his friend, a sycophant named Marcus, guffawed at the punchline of Julian's story. In his exaggerated mirth, Marcus threw his arm back, catching Lena's wrist with a jarring impact. The bottle tilted. A cascade of ruby-red wine, worth $4,000 a bottle, sluiced down the front of Lena's crisp white shirt, splashing onto the pristine tablecloth and onto Julian's tailored trousers. Silence fell over the table. The restaurant's heartbeat stuttered. Every eye was on the spreading stain, a dark, accusing blemish in the golden light. Julian Croft looked down at his leg. He looked at the ruined tablecloth. Then, his gaze, cold and sharp as splintered ice, lifted to Lena. Her glasses had been knocked askew by the jolt, and she was carefully setting the bottle down on the service trolley before addressing the damage. "My apologies, sir," she began, her voice still impossibly calm. "It was an accident." Julian's voice was low, but it carried a venom that made the air crackle. "An accident? You clumsy oaf. Do you have any idea what this suit costs? Do you know what this wine costs?" He stood up, towering over her. The wine had soaked her shirt, making it cling uncomfortably to her skin. "This is incompetence on a level I have never witnessed." The restaurant manager, a perpetually nervous man named Mr. Dubois, scurried over, his face pale. "Mr. Croft, my deepest apologies. We will of course handle the dry cleaning, and this bottle is on the house, and your entire meal—" Julian held up a hand, silencing him. His eyes never left Lena. A cruel, speculative smile began to play on his lips. It was the smile of a predator that had found a new, interesting toy to break. No, Dubois," he said silkily, "that's not nearly enough. An apology should be memorable. It should be entertaining." He picked up his own glass of wine, swirling the dark liquid. The other guests were watching now, a captive audience to a drama they hadn't paid for. Mr. Sterling looked profoundly uncomfortable, his lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "I think," Julian continued, his voice resonating with theatrical cruelty, "that our little waitress here owes us a performance, a gesture of her deep and profound regret." With a swift, deliberate motion, he inverted his glass, drenching the front of Lena's uniform in yet more wine. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The dark liquid dripped from her chin, from the hem of her shirt. She didn't flinch, didn't make a sound. She just stood there, wine soaking her from collar to waist, her expression unreadable behind her askew glasses. "There," Julian said, placing the empty glass down with a soft click. "Now you're properly attired for your apology." He gestured to the small, empty space between the tables. "Dance for us. Dance for my friends, for Mr. Sterling. Dance, and maybe I'll forgive your clumsiness." The demand was so outrageous, so profoundly humiliating, that it hung in the air like a toxic fog. Mr. Dubois looked as if he might faint. Julian's friends snickered, their faces alight with the gleeful cruelty of schoolboys tormenting a stray cat. Lena remained still for a long moment. The silence stretched, taut and heavy. She could feel the drip of wine down her skin, the weight of dozens of eyes on her. She heard Julian's soft, goading chuckle. "What's the matter? Stage fright?" he mocked. Slowly, Lena lifted her hands, not to wipe away the wine, not to hide her face. She reached up and, with a single deliberate movement, she pushed her glasses back up her nose, settling them properly. Then, with the same unnerving calm, she took them off. She folded them neatly and placed them on her service tray. And then she looked at Julian Croft. For the first time that night, he saw her eyes. They were not the downcast, timid eyes of a servant. They were the color of a twilight storm, a deep, penetrating violet gray, fringed with dark lashes. But it wasn't the color that caused the air to leave Julian's lungs. It was the expression within them. It was an ancient, unyielding authority, a clarity so profound it felt as though she could see not just into his soul, but into the ledger of his entire lineage, weighing and judging every generation. They were eyes that did not ask for respect, but commanded it as their birthright. They were eyes that had appraised nations and sealed the fates of fortunes far greater than his. Across the table, Arthur Sterling's wineglass stopped halfway to his lips. His face went slack with shock, then pale with a dawning, horrified recognition. He had seen those eyes before. Not in person, but in official portraits, in the society pages of magazines that chronicled the lives of the world's most powerful and reclusive figures. He had seen them in a photograph from the Eldoria Global Investment Summit, looking out from the face of the keynote speaker, a woman who commanded a sovereign wealth fund rumored to be worth $1 trillion. "Your Highness," Sterling breathed, the words barely a whisper, but they cut through the silence like a thunderclap. He began to rise from his chair, his movements stiff with shock and a sudden, overwhelming deference. Julian Croft's sneer froze on his face. The world tilted on its axis, the solid ground of his privilege turning to quicksand beneath his feet. He stared at the waitress, at the woman he had just drenched in wine and ordered to dance like a court jester, and saw not a clumsy servant, but something else entirely, something impossible. The woman who called herself Lena gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Mr. Sterling, a gesture of acknowledgement between equals. Then her gaze, her billion-dollar royal eyes, returned to Julian, and they held no forgiveness. They held only the quiet, patient promise of a reckoning. The shift in the room was palpable, a physical change in atmospheric pressure. The snickers from Julian's friends died in their throats, replaced by a wide-eyed, gaping confusion. Mr. Dubois, the manager, looked back and forth between the half-risen, deferential Mr. Sterling and the wine-soaked waitress, his mind struggling to bridge the chasm between what he saw and what he had just heard. "Your Highness." The title was an alien species in the ecosystem of his restaurant. Julian was the epicenter of this sudden, bewildering vortex. His brain, so accustomed to a world that bent to his whims, refused to process the new reality. He saw the same woman, the plain hair tied back, the cheap uniform now stained and ruined, the smudge of wine on her cheek. But her eyes. Those eyes were rewriting the entire narrative. They held a power that was utterly at odds with her appearance, a power that was now methodically dismantling his own. What did you call her?" Julian stammered, his question directed at Sterling, but his gaze still locked on the woman. Arthur Sterling was fully on his feet now, his napkin falling unheeded to the floor. He gave a slight formal bow from the waist, a gesture of profound respect that looked utterly bizarre directed at a waitress. "Julian," Sterling's voice was strained, heavy with a gravity that chilled the blood. "You need to apologize. Now." But Julian was still caught in the undertow of disbelief. Apologize? To her? What is this, some kind of joke? Did you pay her to do this, Arthur? A little prank to test me? The woman's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. It was the smile of a queen observing the foolish antics of a courtier who had fatally misjudged his position. "He believes this is a performance, Mr. Sterling," she said. Her voice had changed. The meek, soft murmur was gone. In its place was a clear, resonant tone, imbued with the effortless command of someone accustomed to being heard in boardrooms and throne rooms. Each word was perfectly enunciated, carrying the weight of an imperial decree. "Perhaps I have been too convincing in my role." She took a small step away from the table, creating a space around herself. Her posture, once slightly stooped in a servant's deference, was now ramrod straight. She seemed taller, her presence expanding to fill the room. The cheap, wine-soaked uniform seemed to hang on her differently, like a disguise that was now failing to conceal the royalty beneath. "My name," she said, her violet-grey eyes sweeping over Julian's stunned friends before settling back on him, "is not Lena." She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the anticipation build to an unbearable peak. "I am Princess Serafina Aurelia of Eldoria." The name fell into the room like a diamond into a mud puddle. Eldoria. The tiny, fiercely private European principality was more of a legend than a country. A financial powerhouse whose royal family controlled one of the largest and most influential sovereign wealth funds on the planet. They moved markets, funded nations, and their investments were the stuff of financial folklore. They were famously reclusive, their privacy guarded with an almost mythical ferocity. And this woman, this waitress, was claiming to be one of them. One of Julian's friends, the sycophant Marcus, let out a choked, incredulous laugh. "Princess? You? You're a waitress who just spilled a $4,000 bottle of wine. You're no princess." Serafina's gaze shifted to Marcus. It was a casual, dismissive glance, but it carried the force of a physical blow. Marcus flinched, his laughter dying instantly. "It is a common mistake," Serafina said, her tone cool and instructive, as if lecturing a particularly slow student, "to confuse a person's role with their worth. A lesson your friend, Mr. Croft, is about to learn in the most comprehensive way imaginable." Suddenly, two men who had been seated at a discreet table near the entrance stood up. They were dressed in unassuming but impeccably tailored dark suits. They had been there all evening, blending in, two businessmen having a quiet dinner. Now they moved with a silent, synchronized purpose that spoke of years of training. One of them, a tall man with a face like carved granite and an earpiece subtly tucked into his ear, approached their table. The other moved to stand by the restaurant's main entrance, his posture relaxed, but his eyes scanning every corner of the room. The first man stopped a respectful 3 paces from Serafina. "Your Highness," he said, his voice a low, deferential rumble, "are you all right? Shall we intervene?" His name was Marcus Thorne, the head of her personal security detail, and his use of his own name was a subtle irony not lost on Serafina as he stared down Julian's friend of the same name. "No, Marcus," Serafina replied, not taking her eyes off Julian. "The damage is already done. Now is the time for assessment." The appearance of the security detail shattered the last vestiges of Julian's denial. This was not a prank. This was real. The waitress he had humiliated was, impossibly, Princess Serafina of Eldoria. The name echoed in his memory from financial reports, from whispers of a colossal investment opportunity his father had been chasing for months. The Eldorian Sovereign Fund. They were considering a multi-billion-dollar strategic investment in Croft Enterprises. It was the deal that would secure his family's legacy for a generation. And he had just drenched the head of that fund in wine and ordered her to dance for him. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. The blood drained from his face, leaving him with a pasty, sickly pallor. The entire evening, his peacocking, his arrogance, his casual cruelty, it all replayed in his mind, but now it was cast in the horrifying glow of this new reality. He hadn't been impressing Arthur Sterling. He had been auditioning for Princess Serafina, and he had failed in the most catastrophic way imaginable. He stammered, his mind a frantic scramble of excuses and apologies. I had no idea. Your Highness, please, it was a misunderstanding. A terrible, terrible mistake. A mistake? Serafina's voice was soft again, but now it was a dangerous softness, like the quiet before a storm. No, Mr. Croft, a mistake is taking the wrong turn on a highway. What you did was not a mistake. It was a choice, a reflection of your character. She gestured to her ruined uniform. You saw a waitress, someone you perceived as beneath you, and you chose to humiliate her for sport. You didn't know who I was, and that is the entire point. You have shown me exactly who you are when you believe no one of consequence is watching. She turned to Mr. Dubois, who was now trembling, his face a mask of pure terror. Mr. Dubois, your primary responsibility is to the safety and dignity of your staff. Tonight you failed. You stood by and allowed a guest to verbally and physically assault an employee because you were intimidated by his wealth. Aurelia will be hearing from my legal counsel. Dubois opened his mouth, but only a squeak came out. Finally, Serafina's gaze returned to Julian, and it was utterly devoid of emotion. It was the look of a financier cutting a bad investment, a surgeon excising a cancer. My team and I have been in this city for 2 weeks, Mr. Croft. We have been conducting the final stages of our due diligence for a potential 9-figure investment into your family's company. My little experiment, as Lena, was the final piece of that puzzle. I wanted to observe the nature of the man who would one day inherit control of our potential investment. I believe in understanding the character of my partners. She picked up her folded glasses from the tray, her movements graceful and precise. And you have given me all the data I require. She didn't need to say another word. Julian felt the floor drop out from under him. 9 figures, maybe more. The deal of a lifetime, the validation he had always craved from his demanding father, all of it turning to smoke and ash before his eyes. He had not just spilled a glass of wine, he had emptied an ocean of opportunity and drowned his future in it. The silence in the restaurant was now a roaring in his ears, the sound of his world collapsing. The moments that followed were a blur of controlled, efficient action that stood in stark contrast to the preceding chaos. Marcus Thorne, the head of security, spoke quietly into his wrist, and within a minute, a third member of their team appeared at Serafina's side, holding a simple but elegant black cashmere coat. He draped it over her shoulders, covering the wine-soaked uniform. The gesture was one of deference and protection, instantly transforming her from a beleaguered waitress into a figure of guarded importance. "We have the car ready, Your Highness," Thorne said, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. Serafina nodded, her gaze sweeping one last time over the tableau of ruin she was leaving behind. Julian Croft stood frozen, his face a canvas of disbelief and dawning horror. His friends, who had been so quick to laugh and jeer, now avoided his eyes, shifting awkwardly on their feet as if proximity to him was a communicable disease. The other diners in the restaurant had begun to whisper amongst themselves, the story spreading in hushed, excited tones. Aurelia would never be the same. Its reputation as a sanctuary of quiet luxury had been shattered, replaced by the notoriety of this single, catastrophic event. Only Arthur Sterling seemed to possess any sense of composure. He stepped forward, his expression grave. "Your Highness," he said, his voice filled with genuine remorse, "on behalf of, well, on my own behalf, I am deeply sorry for what you were subjected to tonight. Julian's behavior was inexcusable. I am ashamed to have been present for it." Serafina looked at the older man, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than icy composure crossed her features. It was a hint of weariness, of disappointment in the world she was so often forced to navigate. "Your apology is noted, Mr. Sterling," she said, "but it is not yours to give. The offense was not committed by you." She paused, her gaze drifting back to Julian. "Tell me, Mr. Sterling, you have known the Croft family for years. Is this who he truly is?" The question was a test, and Sterling knew it. He could try to defend Julian, to mitigate the damage, to salvage the multi-billion-dollar deal that was now hanging by a thread. Or he could tell the truth. He looked at Julian's pathetic, crumbling facade, and then back at the princess's clear, unwavering eyes. There was only one choice for a man of his integrity. "Yes, Your Highness," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "I am afraid it is. I have seen this entitlement in him before. I had hoped he would outgrow it. I was wrong." Serafina gave a single, sharp nod. It was the confirmation she had expected. "Thank you for your honesty. It is a rarer commodity than I would like." With that, she turned to leave. Her security detail formed a subtle wedge around her, parting the stunned onlookers as she walked towards the exit. Her stride was confident and unhurried. She did not look back. As she passed the Maître d''s station, the terrified Mr. Dubois rushed forward. "Your Highness, please, is there anything at all I can do?" Serafina stopped and looked at him. Her gaze was not angry, but clinical. "You can start by creating a workplace where your employees are valued more than your wealthiest customer's ego. You can remember that the person serving the meal is no less human than the person eating it. That will be a start." She continued out the door and into the cool night air, leaving a stunned and silent restaurant in her wake. A sleek, black, unadorned sedan, the kind that whispers of quiet power rather than shouts with flashy logos, was waiting at the curb. The door was opened by another agent, and she slid inside without a word. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly, melting into the city's traffic. Inside the soundproof interior was an oasis of calm. Serafina leaned her head back against the plush leather and finally closed her eyes, letting out a long, slow breath. The icy composure she had maintained began to thaw, revealing the fatigue beneath. "The recordings from the restaurant are secure?" she asked, her eyes still closed. "Yes, Your Highness," Marcus Thorne replied from the front passenger seat. "Audio and video. The micro camera in your glasses and the one in the brooch on your uniform performed perfectly. We have a complete record of the entire exchange." "Good," she said. "Send a copy to the board of the Eldorian Fund, and another to my father." There was a moment of silence, then Thorne asked, his voice carefully neutral, "And Croft Enterprises?" Serafina opened her eyes. They seemed to glitter in the passing city lights. "No, not yet. I want Mr. Julian Croft to make the call to his father. I want him to try and explain how he single-handedly vaporized the largest potential investment in his company's history. I want his father to hear it from him." She turned to look out the window at the blurred lights of the city. "This was never just about a financial transaction, Marcus. Croft Enterprises is a global leader in logistics and shipping. An investment from us would have given them the capital to pioneer green, sustainable shipping technologies. It could have changed the entire industry. It was a legacy project." Her voice was tinged with a genuine sadness. "But a legacy cannot be built on a foundation of rotten character. The man who would one day lead that company believes that power is the right to degrade others. A man like that cannot be trusted with our capital, and he certainly cannot be trusted to build a better future." The car sped through the night, carrying the princess away from the wreckage of Julian Croft's life. Back at Aurelia, the full weight of what had happened was beginning to settle. Julian had finally collapsed into his chair, his hands shaking, his face ashen. Arthur Sterling looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt before turning to the manager. "I'll take care of my bill," Sterling said quietly, pulling out his wallet. "As for Mr. Croft's, I suspect he has more significant debts to worry about." He placed a few bills on the table and walked out without a backward glance, leaving Julian completely and utterly alone in the ruin he had created. The drive back to the penthouse suite that served as her temporary headquarters was silent. Serafina watched the city lights streak by, her mind already shifting from the raw emotion of the confrontation to the cold, hard calculus of its aftermath. The persona of Lena, the meek waitress, dissolved completely, leaving only the princess, the strategist, the CEO of one of the world's most formidable financial institutions. Upon arriving, the atmosphere in the suite was one of quiet, intense activity. Aides moved with hushed efficiency through the elegantly appointed rooms, their laptops casting a cool blue glow on their focused faces. This was the real nerve center of her operation, a world away from the clatter of plates and the false deference of a high-end restaurant. Her chief of staff, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman named Anya, met her at the door with a fresh change of clothes and a tablet computer. Anya's expression was a carefully neutral mask, but her eyes held a spark of concern. "The preliminary report is ready, Your Highness," Anya said, her voice low. "The board has been alerted. Your father is awaiting your call." "Thank you, Anya," Serafina said, taking the tablet. "Get me a secure line to the palace, and please find out the name of the waitress who was supposed to have the evening shift tonight. The one I replaced. I want to make sure she's compensated for the disruption." "Already done, Your Highness. Her name is Clara. We have arranged for a severance package for her from the restaurant equivalent to 5 years' salary, deposited anonymously. We felt it was unlikely she would have a pleasant working environment at Aurelia going forward." Serafina nodded, a flicker of approval in her eyes. "Good. That's very good." She disappeared into her private study to change and make the call. The cashmere coat came off, followed by the stained, cheap uniform. She discarded it in a heap on the floor, a relic of a life she had worn for 2 weeks. As she changed into a simple silk blouse and tailored trousers, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The face was the same, but the context was everything. The illusion was over. She sat behind a large mahogany desk and initiated the encrypted video call. A moment later, the face of King Alistair of Eldoria appeared on the screen. He was a man in his late 60s, with the same piercing violet-grey eyes as his daughter, though his were etched with the lines of wisdom and worry. "Serafina," he said, his voice a warm baritone that held no hint of royal pomp. "Marcus sent me the footage. Are you unharmed?" "I am fine, father," she replied. "My dignity is perhaps a little bruised, but my person is intact. More importantly, my judgment has been vindicated." The king sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "I never liked the idea of you going undercover like this. It's too dangerous." "It was necessary," she countered firmly. "The numbers on Croft Enterprises were perfect. Their logistics networks, their market share, their projections, all flawless. But I've learned that the numbers don't tell the whole story. An organization is a reflection of its leadership, and the future leader of that company is a petty, cruel tyrant who gets his pleasure from tormenting those he sees as helpless." "He drenched you in wine," the king said, a hard edge entering his voice. "He ordered you to dance. And in doing so, he saved us $1 billion and a partnership with a moral bankrupt." She finished calmly. "It was the most illuminating board meeting I have ever attended. He showed us his soul, and it is rotten. We cannot attach the Eldorian name to that." King Alistair nodded slowly, the anger in his eyes being replaced by a grudging respect for his daughter's methods. "So, the deal is off. Completely. Completely and irrevocably," she confirmed. "I will make the official announcement in the morning. I want the markets to know exactly why we are withdrawing our interest. This isn't just a failed deal, it's a statement. The Eldorian Fund will not reward this kind of character. We invest in progress, not in pathology. There will be fallout, Serafina. The Crofts are a powerful family. They will not take this quietly." A wry smile touched Serafina's lips. "Let them make their noise. They are a regional power. We are a global force. Let us see whose voice is louder." Meanwhile, across town, Julian Croft was living through the longest hour of his life. After sitting in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity, he had finally fumbled for his phone, his fingers trembling so badly he could barely unlock it. He had to call his father. The thought filled him with a dread so profound it was nauseating. Damien Croft was a titan of industry, a ruthless, self-made man who had built his empire from the ground up. He was demanding, unforgiving, and had little patience for failure, especially from his only son, whom he had always suspected of being soft and spoiled. Julian selected the contact and pressed the call button. It rang twice before his father's gruff voice answered. "Julian, this is late. This had better be important." "Father," Julian began, his own voice sounding weak and thin. Something has happened." "What is it? Did Sterling sign the preliminary agreement?" Damien asked, his tone sharp and impatient. "No, Father, it's about the Eldorian deal." Julian stumbled through the story, his words tumbling out in a panicked, incoherent stream. He tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, an accident, a joke that had gone horribly wrong. He painted the waitress as clumsy, as insolent. But the core facts were unavoidable. The wine, the demand to dance, the horrifying reveal. There was a long, dead silence on the other end of the line. Julian could hear his father's breathing, slow and heavy. When Damien Croft finally spoke, his voice was deceptively calm, a low, rumbling tone that promised a volcanic eruption. "Let me see if I understand this," Damien said, each word a chip of ice. "You had Princess Serafina of Eldoria, the woman who holds the key to our company's future, standing in front of you. And you treated her like a servant, poured wine on her, and ordered her to dance for your amusement. I didn't know it was her, father. She was dressed as a waitress," Julian pleaded, his voice cracking. "You imbecile." The roar that came through the phone was so loud, Julian physically flinched, pulling the device away from his ear. "Do you think that matters? Do you think her title is a magic cloak she puts on and takes off? Her character is constant. Your character is the problem. I gave you everything, every advantage, and you are nothing but a spoiled, arrogant child who has just set fire to our legacy. You didn't just lose a deal, you moron. You have made an enemy of the House of Eldoria. Do you have any conception of what that means?" Julian was silent, tears of fear and humiliation welling in his eyes. "You are to go to your apartment, and you are to wait for me," Damien commanded, his voice now a low, menacing hiss. "Do not speak to anyone. Do not answer your phone. We are going to try and salvage something from the smoldering wreckage you have made of our lives. But I promise you this, Julian. Your life, as you know it, is over." The line went dead. Julian stared at his phone, the silence in the now empty restaurant pressing in on him. His father's words echoed in his ears. "Your life, as you know it, is over." For the first time, faced with a consequence he couldn't buy, bully, or charm his way out of, Julian Croft began to understand the true meaning of power and the terrifying reality of having none at all. The dawn broke over the city with an indifferent grey light, but for the financial world, it was the beginning of an earthquake. At precisely 8 a.m., as the markets opened, the Eldorian Sovereign Fund released an official statement. It was a masterclass in corporate warfare, elegant in its language and devastating in its impact. The statement announced the immediate and permanent cessation of all investment considerations regarding Croft Enterprises. It didn't mention the incident at Aurelia directly. It didn't need to. It spoke of a fundamental misalignment of values and a lack of confidence in the future leadership's commitment to ethical and responsible governance. It concluded with a chillingly simple line. "The Eldorian Fund believes that character is the most valuable asset, and in this instance, we found the deficit to be too great to overlook." The word character was the kill shot. In the coded language of high finance, it was an unprecedented and deeply personal condemnation. The market reacted instantly and brutally. Traders on the floor of the stock exchange saw the news flash across their terminals. The ticker symbol for Croft Enterprises, CRFT, turned from a stable green to a blood red. Sell orders flooded the system. The stock, which had been trading at an all-time high in anticipation of the Eldorian deal, plummeted. Within the first hour of trading, it had lost 20% of its value. By noon, it was down by 40%. Billions of dollars in market capitalization had evaporated into thin air. The ripple effect was immediate. Croft Enterprises creditors, the banks that held their massive loans, called emergency meetings. Their partners, who had aligned themselves with the Crofts to bask in the potential glow of Eldorian capital, began to distance themselves. Phones at Croft headquarters rang incessantly, with panicked investors, furious board members, and opportunistic journalists all demanding answers. Damien Croft was in the center of the storm. He had been up all night, working with his crisis management team, but it was like trying to patch a dam with chewing gum. The Eldorian statement had been a precision-guided missile, and it had hit its target perfectly. His son's idiotic actions had not just scuttled a deal, they had exposed a fatal weakness in the company's succession plan, and the market was punishing them for it. He had dealt with Julian earlier that morning. It hadn't been a conversation, it had been a verdict. He found his son in his sprawling minimalist apartment, looking pale and disheveled. "Get dressed," Damien had ordered, his voice flat and devoid of any paternal warmth. "You are going to issue a public apology." "Will it help?" Julian asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "No," Damien replied coldly. "Of course it won't. The princess does not care about your apology. This is not for her. This is for the market. It's a pathetic, desperate attempt to show them that we understand the magnitude of our failure. You are going to go on camera. You are going to look pathetic and remorseful, and you are going to resign from the board of directors, effective immediately." Julian's head snapped up. "Resign? Father, no." "It's not a request," Damien snarled, his face contorting with rage. "It's the only move we have left. You are now a liability, a walking, talking symbol of our company's terrible judgment. You will be removed. You will be stripped of your executive title, your company credit cards, your car. You will be given a modest allowance, and you will disappear from public life. Is that clear?" The humiliation was absolute. Julian, who had lived his entire life as the heir apparent, was being publicly cast out, disinherited in all but name. Meanwhile, Arthur Sterling was making his own moves. He called an emergency board meeting for his own company, Sterling Industries. "As of this morning," he announced to his board members, his face grim, "we are terminating our joint venture with Croft Enterprises. We are exercising the exit clause in our contract, citing reputational risk." There were murmurs of protest. The joint venture was profitable. "Our profits," Sterling cut them off, his voice ringing with authority, "are built on a reputation of integrity and smart partnerships. The Croft brand is now toxic. The Eldorian Fund does not make moves like this lightly. Their condemnation is a black mark that will not wash away for a decade. We will cut our losses, and we will cut them now. I will not have our name dragged through the mud with theirs." The news of Sterling Industries pulling out hit the wire services mid-afternoon. It was the second major blow, a confirmation from a respected peer that Croft Enterprises was now a pariah. The stock plunged another 10%. In her penthouse suite, Serafina watched the fallout with a calm, analytical detachment. Anya provided her with regular updates, displaying charts and news feeds on a large screen. Croft Enterprises has lost an estimated $12 billion in market value since the market opened, Anya reported. Their primary lenders are threatening to call in their debt covenants. The board is in chaos. Serafina stared at the screen, her expression unreadable. She felt no triumph, no glee. There was a grim sense of necessity to it all, like a surgeon who had to perform a painful amputation to stop the spread of a disease. "What about Aurelia?" she asked. "The restaurant is in freefall," Anya said, a slight smile touching her lips. "The story has leaked. The Princess and the Pauper Prince, one gossip site is calling it. Every high society patron in the city has cancelled their reservations. They are facing a boycott not just for the incident itself, but for the manager's failure to protect his staff. It seems you have inadvertently started a small revolution in the service industry." Serafina allowed herself a small, wry smile. Perhaps some good will come of this after all. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unsaved number. She opened it. "Your Highness, this is Damien Croft. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I implore you to grant me 5 minutes of your time. Not for my son, but for the thousands of employees whose livelihoods are now at risk because of his actions. Please." Serafina read the message, her finger hovering over the delete button. She thought of the ordinary people working at Croft Enterprises, the dock workers, the truck drivers, the office clerks, who had done nothing wrong and were now facing uncertainty because of the arrogance of one man. Her decision was swift. She was not a vengeful deity. She was a leader, and leadership sometimes required listening, even to the vanquished. She typed a reply. "Mr. Croft, my schedule is very busy, but I will grant you and your son a meeting, tomorrow, 10 a.m. My offices, come alone." She sent the message. The meeting was not about forgiveness. It was about delivering the final clinical lesson in a curriculum of consequences. It was about ensuring the rot at the top of Croft Enterprises could never threaten a partnership with her house again. The Eldorian Fund's temporary offices were located in the city's most modern skyscraper, occupying the entire top floor. It was a space designed to communicate quiet, unassailable power. The design was minimalist, with vast panes of glass offering a panoramic view of the city below, making the world of ordinary commerce seem distant and small. The art on the walls consisted of a few select masterpieces, each worth more than most corporate headquarters. There was no gold, no marble, no ostentatious displays of wealth, only the profound luxury of space, silence, and impeccable taste. This was Serafina's world. It was here, surrounded by the quiet hum of data servers and the hushed tones of her analysts, that she commanded her family's financial empire. Her work as Lena felt like a lifetime ago, a strange fever dream. Yet the experience had been invaluable. It had stripped away the layers of deference and protocol that normally insulated her from the world, exposing her to a raw, unfiltered reality. It had reminded her that a balance sheet could not measure a man's soul. Marcus Thorne stood by the window, looking down at the city. "They are on their way up, Your Highness." "Just the two of them?" Serafina asked, not looking up from a report on her desk. "Yes, as instructed." Serafina nodded. "Let them wait in the conference room for a few minutes. Let them contemplate the view." It was a subtle power play, and a deliberate one. She wanted Damien and Julian Croft to sit in that glass-walled room, to look down at the city their family had helped build, and to feel the dizzying height from which they were about to fall. She thought back on her motivations for the undercover operation. It had been a risk, and her father had been right to be concerned. But Croft Enterprises was a unique case. The company was at a generational crossroads. Damien Croft, the brilliant but ruthless founder, was nearing retirement. Julian, the sole heir, was a known quantity in society circles, famous for his parties, his cars, his temper. There were whispers, rumors of his arrogance, but nothing concrete. Financial analysis could model risk, but it could not model character. Serafina believed in a form of capitalism that was both profitable and principled. The Eldorian Fund invested for generations, not just for the next quarter. They sought partners who shared their long-term vision, who understood that sustainable success was built on a foundation of integrity. Julian Croft's behavior represented everything she stood against. His casual cruelty was a symptom of a deeper sickness, a belief that his wealth and status placed him above the basic rules of human decency. A company led by such a man would inevitably rot from the inside out. It would cut corners, exploit its workers, and deceive its partners, all in service of the leader's ego. She had seen it happen before. Her mission was to prevent it from happening with her family's money. Anya entered the office. They are settled in the conference room. Mr. Croft the elder seems tense. The son looks like a ghost. "I imagine so," Serafina said, finally closing the report and standing up. She was dressed in a severe dark grey business suit, her hair pulled back in a tight professional chignon. She wore no jewelry except for a simple, elegant watch. Her face was composed, her expression neutral. This was not a princess preparing for a courtly function, this was a general preparing for the final surrender of a defeated enemy. "Shall I join you?" Anya asked. "No," Serafina said. "This is a conversation that needs to be had directly. Just the three of us." She walked down the silent, carpeted hallway to the conference room. The glass walls allowed her to see the two men inside before they saw her. Damien Croft, a bull of a man even in his expensive suit, was pacing back and forth, his face a thunderous mask of fury and anxiety. Julian was sitting at the vast glass table, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on his hands. He looked broken, a pale imitation of the preening, arrogant man from the restaurant. Serafina paused at the door, taking a deep breath. She was not doing this out of anger. The anger had burned out, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. She was doing this because it was necessary. It was her duty, to her family, to her fund, and to the principles she had sworn to uphold. She pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the large, sparse room. "Thank you for coming." Both men flinched at the sound of her voice. Damien stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression a complex mixture of rage, desperation, and a forced, unnatural deference. Julian didn't even look up. "Your Highness," Damien began, his voice raspy, "thank you for seeing us. I I want to offer my most profound and humble apologies for what happened." Serafina walked slowly to the head of the table and remained standing. She did not invite them to sit. Though Julian already was, she gestured towards the empty chair next to him. "Please, Mr. Croft, sit." Damien sat, his large frame looking awkward and constrained in the minimalist chair. The two of them were now seated before her like supplicants. "Let us be clear about why we are here," Serafina said, her tone crisp and businesslike. "We are not here to discuss apologies. An apology is an acknowledgement of wrongdoing with an intent to change. What happened at Aurelia was not a simple misstep. It was a character-defining event." Her gaze fell upon Julian, who finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a mixture of fear and resentment. "You, Mr. Croft," she said, addressing the son directly, "believe that your birthright grants you a license to be cruel. You believe that service staff are not people, but objects for your amusement or your scorn. You believe that respect is something owed to you, not something you must earn. These are not beliefs that can be fixed with a press release or a forced resignation." She then turned her attention to Damien. "And you, sir, are the architect of this character. You gave him wealth without responsibility, power without wisdom. You raised an heir, but not a leader. The failure is ultimately yours." Damien's face flushed with anger, but he bit back a retort. He knew he had no leverage here. He was utterly at her mercy. "The damage to my company," he started, his voice strained. "The jobs, the families that depend on us." "Do not presume to lecture me on responsibility, Mr. Croft," Serafina cut him off, her voice dropping to an icy calm. "I am responsible for a nation's wealth. I am responsible for securing the future of my people for generations to come. That is why I cannot, under any circumstances, entangle our future with yours. The rot is too deep." She leaned forward slightly, placing her hands on the back of the chair. "So no, I do not accept your apology. It is meaningless. We are not here for absolution. You requested this meeting. The floor is yours. Why are you here?" The question hung in the air, stripping away all pretense. She had dismantled their apologies, rejected their pleas for sympathy. She had laid the truth bare. Now they had to justify their presence in her room, and Damien Croft, for the first time in his professional life, seemed to have no answer. He looked at his son, then back at the implacable princess, and the full, crushing weight of his defeat finally settled upon him. The silence in the glass-walled conference room stretched, thick and suffocating. Damien Croft, a man used to dominating every room he entered, searched for words but found none. He had come prepared for anger, for shouting, perhaps even for negotiation. He was not prepared for this, a cold, dispassionate autopsy of his family's moral failings. It was Julian who finally broke the silence. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it was laced with a sullen, petulant anger that proved his humiliation had taught him nothing. "We get it," he mumbled, staring at the polished surface of the table. "You're a princess. I made a mistake. You've made your point. You've ruined us. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted?" Serafina's gaze narrowed. She looked at him not with anger, but with a profound clinical disappointment. "Happy? Mr. Croft, you are still operating under the delusion that this is about you, that this is some personal vendetta. You think my goal was to ruin you for a personal slight." She shook her head slowly. "This has never been about my feelings. It is about my responsibility. The Eldorian Fund is more than a collection of assets. It is an engine for the future. We invest in companies that we believe will make the world more efficient, more sustainable, more humane. We were prepared to invest billions of dollars in your company to help you pioneer a fleet of zero-emission cargo ships. A project that could have drastically reduced global pollution. A project that could have been your family's defining legacy." She let that sink in. The air went out of Damien's lungs. He had known the investment was for green initiatives, but he hadn't understood the scale of Serafina's vision. It wasn't just about profit, it was about changing the world. "That legacy," Serafina continued, her eyes fixed on Julian, "required a leader of vision, integrity, and empathy. I came to your city to see if you were that leader, and in a single evening, You showed me you were the opposite. You showed me a man who, when given a small amount of power over a single helpless person, would choose to be a tyrant. A man who enjoys cruelty. And I asked myself a simple question. If this is how he treats a waitress when he thinks no one is looking, how will he treat his employees, his partners, his planet, when he is given control of a multi-billion-dollar global enterprise? She didn't need to answer the question. The answer was the reason they were all in this room. So no, Mr. Croft, I am not happy, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I am profoundly disappointed. You were not just an investment, you were a test case. And you have failed, not just for yourself, but for the potential good we could have done together. She straightened up, her demeanor shifting back to that of a decisive executive. The lesson was over. The decision of the Eldorian Fund is final. We will not be investing in Croft Enterprises. Furthermore, we will be issuing a directive to our portfolio companies, the hundreds of global corporations in which we hold significant stakes, advising them that we consider Croft Enterprises to be a high-risk partner due to unstable and unethical leadership succession. We will not mandate they cease business with you, but we will make our position clear. A partnership with you is a liability in our eyes. It was a death sentence, delivered with the calm precision of a surgeon. She was not just withdrawing her own money, she was poisoning the well. She was making the Croft name radioactive throughout the global economy. Damien Croft finally looked defeated. The fight was gone from his eyes, replaced by a hollow, empty grey. He had spent his life building an empire, and his own son had handed their enemies the tools to tear it down. There is nothing, he asked, his voice a broken rasp. Nothing we can do? There is something you can do, Mr. Croft, Serafina said, her gaze on the father. You can reclaim your company, remove your son not just from the board, but from the line of succession entirely. Institute a new era of leadership based on merit and character, not bloodline. Restructure your company from the top down, show the world that the rot has been excised. It will take years. It will be painful, but it is the only path back from the abyss your son has led you to. She walked towards the door. My advice is freely given. Whether you have the courage to take it is up to you. She paused with her hand on the door handle and looked back one last time at Julian. He was staring at her, his face a mask of impotent fury. In his eyes, she saw no remorse, no understanding, only the bitter resentment of a prince whose favorite toy had been taken away. He had learned nothing. One more thing, Mr. Croft, she said to Julian, her voice soft but carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. You ordered me to dance, and in a way, I have. We have all been part of a performance for the last 48 hours. The entire financial world has been watching. This was the dance, and you were my partner. I hope you enjoyed the show. With that, she swept out of the room, leaving the father and son alone in the silent, glass-walled cage, with the ruins of their empire laid out far below them. Serafina did not look back. She walked down the hall to her office, where Anya was waiting. It is done, Serafina said. And the Crofts? Their fate is in their own hands now, she replied, walking over to the vast window. She looked out at the sprawling city, at the endless flow of traffic, the millions of lives moving and intersecting. Her brief time as Lena, the invisible waitress, had given her a new perspective. She had felt the casual sting of irrelevance, the chilling fear of powerlessness. It had reinforced her conviction that true power was not the freedom to command, but the responsibility to protect. She had passed judgment on Julian Croft not as a princess, but as a protector of a future he was unworthy to build. Her work here was finished. It was time to go home and find a new partner, a new project, another chance to build something that would last. The world was full of people like Julian Croft, but it was also full of visionaries and builders. Her job was to find them,